Great. So thanks so much for having us. Kind of as this presentation gets pulled up, want to give kind of a big picture overview. Definitely want to keep this conversational, so feel free to jump in with any questions as you have them. But kind of big picture of what BlockPower is focused on doing is helping organizations that are already in the field increase health, wealth, and power in Black communities. So I'm Karthik, I'm a professor at Howard, and Chris Parker is a close friend and colleague, and also the chief research officer of BlockPower. So what is BlockPower? Kind of big picture, if we go to the next slide, what BlockPower does, BlockPower works with community organizations that are already on the ground, like Color of Change and the New Georgia Project, is one of Stacey Abrams' groups, and Black Leaders Organizing for Communities in Milwaukee, to pay citizens of majority Black neighborhoods to train people that they already know to increase voter turnout. So kind of why is this work important, and kind of why do we go down this path? On the next slide, we see basically that kind of big picture, American democracy is in crisis. Really never has voter turnout consistently been across demographics above 70%. So that means that even in the biggest election years, including 2016 and 2020, 30% of people, if not more, don't vote consistently. And this is, for their multitude of reasons, but there's one demographic in particular that has been targeted over and over and over by voter suppression tactics, and the Black community has seen this and has seen this type of voter suppression over and over, and we're seeing that kind of we're seeing even more of those efforts happening now in this past year as well. And this is something that is sadly not uncommon in our history, and it's something that is kind of has always been a stain on our democracy, and it's something that despite so many odds, Black communities have turned out in force, such that they're basically not underrepresented in the electorate. However, they are still, if you go to the next slide, still in places that so there's still massive untapped political power in Black communities that can drive real change. So if you look in 2016, for example, there were 6 states where the eligible but non-voting Black population was at least 2.8 times the presidential margin. So if you look in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, that number, that multiple. So for example, in Michigan, what this shows, so the blue bar represents the margin between the candidates in 2016, and the red bars represent the red lines represent the margin, and the blue bar represents the eligible but non-voting Black population. And also there were 5 Senate races in these states, and those margins of the eligible but non-voting Black population was oftentimes larger than even the Senate margins. So what's interesting is that there's a huge amount of untapped political power in the Black community in these 6 states, and this is not rocket science. There are tons and tons of groups that have recognized this and are in general working on organizing in communities to increase voter turnout. So on the next slide, this type of concentration is even you do kind of Pareto analysis over and over, and you see there's 14 cities, counties, and metro areas account for half of the Black population. So just some cities, for example, just the Miami Metro or just the Atlanta Metro, there's massive power relative to the margin. And if you drill down even further on the next slide, you'll see even further, as a direct result of segregationist policies and redlining, you have massive concentration within cities. So, Milwaukee is kind of the wildest example of this, where 56% of the entire Black population of the state of Wisconsin lives in Milwaukee County alone. Or I'm sorry, lives in majority Black census blocks in Milwaukee County alone. And this isn't, we see the same kind of type of segregation in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina as well. Basically, the upshot is that in these specific communities, there's massive untapped political power, and these are oftentimes the schools that are most underinvested in. Transportation, there's transportation inequity, health inequity, education inequity, kind of the list goes on and on and on. And this exists side by side with this kind of incredible untapped political power. So if you go to the next slide, this question of voter turnout is not a new one. There have been hundreds of voter turnout experiments that have looked at kind of what actually is effective in increasing voter turnout. So, we have, if you look at the 2016 or even the kind of 2020 results, there are 30 percentage points of people in general, if not more, 30 to 35% of people who didn't vote consistently or who didn't vote. So if you look at kind of what the research has shown as to kind of what actually increased voter turnout, paid communication, which most of the money goes into, is relatively ineffective. It moves the needle less than 1 percentage point out of the 40 that's 30, 35 or 40 percentage points on the table. Then what's more effective than that is a one-off door knock or canvas from a stranger. What's slightly more effective than that is a repeated door knock from a stranger. But what the gold standard is what's called relational voter engagement. Again, not rocket science, it's just, and kind of not anything new. It's just when you get approached by someone you trust, a family member, friend, or neighbor, you're more likely to vote. And that produces a 2 to 3 percentage point gain. But on the next slide, kind of one question is like, hey, why is that only 3 percentage points out of 40 that are on the table? And what's interesting is that traditionally, like, relational voter engagement is practiced by volunteers. And volunteers on political campaigns skew white, male, or white, female, upper income, and suburban, and people who are disproportionately, there's kind of a disjoint set or very, very small overlap here between people who are likely to volunteer and people who are less likely to vote. The skews male, the skews lower income, the skews urban. So essentially, RVE only works when you actually have a relationship with the person. But because there aren't those pre-existing relationships, relational voter engagement really has a cap. So essentially, what we try to do is help organizations find people in the blue circle and pay them to find other people in the blue circle, to train them to talk to other people in the blue circle, so that it's actually people talking to people in communities, talking to people that they already know about why they're voting and why it's important to vote. So if you go to the next slide, essentially what we do is we help organizations recruit what we call ambassadors, train them, then to recruit what we call vote triplers, and we'll get into that. And then those vote triplers can upgrade themselves to become voting ambassadors. So in the next slide, kind of what is this is another kind of flow chart of how this process works. So people sign up, they do an online training and a quiz, and then they have a screening call. Then they're shown lists of. I'm having trouble hearing you. Oh, yep. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you very clearly.
Oh, okay, perfect. Shown lists of low propensity voters who they might know, starting with a geographic list, and then folks actually interact with this platform that we built in order to document their progress. So on the next slide, this is essentially how it might work. So if BlockPower works with Color of Change, for example, is one of the organizations that we work with, and recruited somebody named Anthony, and Anthony becomes a voting ambassador. Anthony looks through a list of low propensity voters. So we presented by default 100 low propensity Black voters who are closest to him, and then also allowed him to search the voter file, which is publicly available, for people that he might know. So maybe he found that he knew Bria, Curtis, Destiny, and Earl. Okay, these are people that he knows. These are people who we have given Anthony the tools to find and also recruit as what we call a volunteer vote triplet. So there's some research that shows that as a vote tripler, as if you commit to getting 3 friends to vote, you're more likely to vote than if you were just straight up asked to vote yourself. So Anthony will ask Bria to recruit 3 of her family members, friends, and neighbors, and Bria will tell Anthony, hey, I can talk to my dad, I can talk to my brother, I can talk to my roommate, and those are the 3 people that I'll commit to talking to and making a plan to vote. So Anthony puts this information under Bria's record, and Bria gets a text message to confirm that she's excited to be a vote tripler, and we push this information about kind of polling places, et cetera, making a plan to vote to Bria, so that she can help Frank Geraldman and her roommate vote. And this kind of happens over and over. And essentially the goal is for a lot of conversations to happen about voting that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And kind of critically and crucially, every time Anthony is able to successfully recruit a volunteer vote tripler, he gets a small compensation. So on the next slide, this basically shows like how because volunteer vote triplers can increase their it can become ambassadors themselves. We hope that this eventually can get to a point where we can have deep penetration within communities. So if you go to the next slide, another kind of critical piece of this is that if you drill into kind of where money gets spent in general on nonpartisan get out the vote efforts, it's by and large on mailers, on TV, radio, digital, in general, impersonal communication. And essentially, we did some modeling, and basically, if we can, you can do some back the envelope math, and you can basically say, hey, like, there are ways that we can invest directly into communities and potentially have a bigger impact than just paying Google or giving a mail vendor somewhere out of state a bunch of money to send messages to people that ultimately don't help anyone. So if you go to the next slide, this is essentially kind of what we focus. We focus specifically on kind of paying people as what we call microfield organizers, or very small, low-level field organizers, not low-level as in very close to the ground and not having a huge geographic area. We're focused on helping them find people that they know to recruit them, to recruit volunteer vote triplers. So ambassadors are just like field organizers. This is what campaigns and organizations do all the time. They hire field organizers, but instead they pay them a lot of money and give them a huge chirp. Essentially what we've enabled a lot of organizations to do is hire a lot of people or pay a lot of people a small amount of money at a time to do relatively small actions that are focused on having conversations with people that they already know. So on the next slide, we implemented this across a bunch of states in November in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Kentucky, South Carolina, et cetera. And kind of we had a big concentration in Florida. And essentially, what we were hoping to show is basically that, hey, something like this is feasible. We can actually, instead of dumping money into stuff that doesn't actually help people, we might be able to have a greater impact by actually investing directly into communities through community organizations that are already working on the ground. So if you go to the next slide, this is essentially kind of big picture, what we were trying to do in November and in January, where we ran another iteration much better iteration of the program in Georgia. But I will turn it over to Chris to take it over from here.
Yeah, so if you're sort of paying attention at the very beginning, on the very first slide, Karthik was co-founder of BlockPower. He has a lot of the political background, volunteering in a lot of campaigns and a lot of background in the political analytics space. And we also worked together on a project where we did a field experiment. And so when the question came about, is this actually going to move the needle? Does BlockPower actually increase voting rates? Karthik gave me a call and said, hey, do you want to help me run a field experiment? And that was, I guess, about almost 18 months ago now, Karthik. I was thinking about that. So 18 months of work that led to 2 field experiments that gave us very consistent, probably we have an effect type results, but we'll get to that in just a second. So what we really wanted to do was say, we have relational voter engagement. We think that works. We have micropayments. Let's do a technology that's going to let us do this during COVID, so we aren't sending people to go knock on doors in the middle of a pandemic. We spent a lot of time with a bunch of just terrific volunteer developers that spent hours on end building the app, building the back-end systems, developing fraud systems manually and automating some of those, building a payment background and a dashboard, and lots of fun calls raising money with people who are donating in the political system. And all at the end, we ran sort of 2 big experiments. And those experiments were one that was focused on the general election in a couple of states, and one that was focused on just the Georgia Senate runoffs. So those are the 2 big experiments that we did. And I'll talk mostly about the Georgia Senate runoffs in just a second. But just to get an idea of what does this technology look like when we drill into the technology itself? If you, our app is not live right now, we have shut it down right now, but if you went to our web app, you would be able to sign up, enter your information, log in with Facebook or Google at the time of these screenshots. Once you're logged in, you can either choose to go find vote tripplers or go look at setting up your payments. If you're going to the vote tripler flow, you're presented with a list of people, the 100 people closest to you. That's sort of this middle panel here. Or you can choose to search for people based on age, sex, first name, last name, those types of things. So you can search for people that you might know. Once you know somebody, so let's say you know Vilma, you say that you know Vilma, then you have a communication with Vilma. And Vilma would tell you, I know person A, person B, and person C. So you would fill out that information about those 3 voters that she was going to talk to. And then Vilma receives a text message that says, hey, you're going to vote triple with Karthik. And here are the 3 people that you said you're going to talk to. It confirmed by saying yes. Once Vilma confirms, then Karthik gets his $25. And so what we'll have is sort of these 3 people in the middle who have each, Karthik has said he knows these 3 people, and only Gerald has actually confirmed. And then the part that sort of builds on what we sort of know as academics is we are building a system that allows you to pay a large number of people a small amount of money and to do it efficiently. So we basically have it so that people can, if they don't have a bank account, they can sign up, they get a bank account, they'll get a debit card in a couple of weeks, or they can link their current bank account. So they can sign up for a Chime bank account or link their own bank account. Once everything's set up, then twice a day, we would push payments through to their account, and people would get paid by the end of the day for their work. So does this flow work? Does adding people to the list actually do anything? And what I want to make very clear is what is treatment in this condition. Treatment in this condition is being added to this list. So possible vote triplers. So what we did is we had a group of people that we added to the list, and we had a group of people that we held out. We wanted to make it possible for people to find as many people as they know. And so we added 90% of people to the list, and we had a 10% holdout sample. And then we were just doing a traditional analysis to say, did we observe higher voting rates in that 90% than in the 10%? So we're sort of a nudging analysis? And my answer is probably. And I'm going to answer that go into a little bit more detail here, but what we are seeing here is about a 3 to 6 percentage point increase in voting among triplers contacted. This is an interesting reminder for me, at least, which is if we just take the Georgia Senate runoffs, we had about 1.1 million people in the experiment. So we had just over a million people, I guess it was 1.2 million. We had just over a million people in the treatment. And so you think to yourself, how in the world can you not identify statistically a 3 to 6 percentage point effect when you have 1.2 million observations? And the reason for that is part of the power calculation is take up. So what we actually had here was, and this is not for the Georgia, but for the Georgia Senate runoff, we actually had about 5,000 to 6,000 people that were treated. So out of the 1 million, we had about a 5,000 person experiment, really. And so what we're seeing is no matter what we do in terms of controls, in terms of trying to get more specificity into our analysis here, we are seeing about a 3 to 6 percentage point increase, but we're seeing pretty wide error bars. We do have some indication, some sort of ad hoc analysis that this tends to be working with younger people. And we have some ad hoc analysis that it tends to be working with females as opposed to males. But again, those are sort of ad hoc, back of the envelope analysis and weren't really set up. Our experiment wasn't set up to do that. So that is where we are, and where we're at right now is a lot of iteration. So we're iterating on the app. We're actually rebuilding the app from the ground up, taking some advice from some of our friends who work in the tech space and are volunteering here. Sort of take your first lesson, tear it down, and start again. So that's where we are, and we'll be trying to run some of these experiments in smaller municipal elections in this fall. So in the next, oh wow, I was about to say in August, and that is now. So that's great. In the next couple of weeks. And also going for a big push into fall 2022. So that's where we're at on the voting side of things. But the interesting thing for me is we basically have an app that lets us pay people, right? People can sign up, we can verify their IDs, and we can pay money, small amount of money to a large amount of people very efficiently. And so what we're trying to do, ignoring the voting stuff for a second here, is think about what else can we do with this app. And in the short run, we're trying to recruit ambassadors by providing health, wealth, and power modules. So somebody can say, I think there should be a module on why you should invest in an IRA, or when you should invest in ETFs versus stocks, or something like that. So that would be, sort of in the wealth side, but why you should get screened for XYZ disease, or what type of information you have to talk to the police about, right? That can be in the power, or voting is also, I think, in the power dimension. And so we don't think that this is necessarily just a voting app anymore. We think of it as a way to we are sort of facilitators in the ability to pay small amounts of money to a large amount of people. And hopefully that's going to allow for health, wealth, and power to be pushed a little bit easier by groups who are already on the ground. We can just sort of facilitate where we are and help groups like Color of Change and New North Carolina Project and New Georgia Project reach communities that they're trying to reach through their efforts. Yeah. So we fly through that sort of on purpose because I think it's actually worthwhile to talk a little bit and hear the questions, right? So first things first is I have some fancy title called Chief Research Officer because we needed to give me a title when communicating with donors and things like that. But I don't think of myself as the person who makes up our research agenda by any means. So if somebody has an idea or wants to try something out, our emails are on the board, and we're absolutely happy to have a conversation and talk about it. So Let me take these two questions in a little bit of order here. Yash, I believe that you're asking, can we use this to impact vaccination? I hope so. Is that the question? I saw you go off mute there for a second.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so I think that's definitely, it's definitely a possibility. We have not pushed down to that space yet because we were rebuilding our app. We haven't gone there yet. We had a presentation, a similar presentation to Sloan Kettering maybe a month ago. And there are also some other more general traditional screening that impacts the Black community more heavily, health screenings that we might want to do. And so I think there are some things in that space. We're trying to figure out, once we get the app back up, fully up and running and get the tech rebuilt, then I think there's definitely in that space to redo some vaccination polls. Yeah, I agree. What percentage of the ambassadors were first-time voters? It's a good question. I actually don't remember off the top of my head. Most of our analysis, if we think about the way that our experiment was designed, was thinking about the triplers, not the ambassadors. So we didn't do a lot of analysis on the ambassadors themselves because they weren't randomly assigned. We didn't say invite only some people and not others. So it was hard to know if we were really having an impact on ambassadors or if this election was driving higher voting rates. It was hard to say. So to be perfectly honest, we didn't look at that. For the vote triplers, I can answer a little bit there, which is to say that the data set that we used is based off of public voting record data and supplemented and added some models and things like that. But one of the columns that's added is a modeled probability to vote. And what we're looking at here is either unregistered people, and unregistered people typically are modeled as a probability of voting of 0. If you haven't gone through the first step of registering, then we model you as a 0 probability. And we actually do walk you through how to register to vote or send you to the right place and how to build a voting plan in our app. And low probability our definition that we dealt with here was lower than 60% modeled probability. So a large number of people that were on the list were actually had not voted before or were unregistered. And anyone that was on the list was at most sort of 60%, which you can think of that as sort of somebody that voted in 2016 or 2008, or 2012, but didn't vote in 16 is kind of the type of person you might think about, or so something in that line. Let's see, Michael. Discrete actions widely dispersed over time, like voting, are one thing. Would more routinized actions be harder to support? Who knows? I mean, I think that is definitely a valid question. And I think it also is going to depend on, I think there's a lot of things up in the air, right? And you think about the community that let's think about Georgia. Think about how many text messages any single human in Georgia got during the Senate runoff. I mean, it was just overwhelmed by all sorts of things. So it's possible that we also just get lost in all of that. And during a normal time, it works better. Sort of the idea that we have here is that if we can get people to do some of the more routine actions, that when we get to the voting action, then we'll be ready to go. And so that is sort of one of the primary reasons why we're going through this process of the health, wealth, and power modules, is to recruit ambassadors, to build a relationship, to make it so that it's not just, oh, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do this little thing on this app and get some money and run. It's, oh, I am an ambassador of BlockPower. This is part of my community. And so when we come to the voting stage, we can turn on the voting action, right? That discrete one-time action, and hopefully change people. But I don't think we have enough to answer which is harder right now, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
No, I was just going to answer the second question, which is the ambassadors get paid, which is the person who goes through the list and says, oh, I know Vilma, I know Nina. that is the person who gets paid. The tripler does not get paid. The tripler is a volunteer who talks to their 3 friends. And how is they can either get money deposited into their bank account that they link or into a Chime account. And we're also moving to a model where we create we send them a debit card, and this debit card can be used to pay for their mobile phone and things that they're using to actually have this communication with their family and friends. Sorry, Karthik, go ahead.
Yeah, just a little bit more on this question of kind of ongoing engagement. There are 2 things that we learned out of Georgia. One was a technical thing, and that is we need to make it easier for people to find people that they know. And that's the contact matching, upload and matching, technical solution that we're working on now. But the second is much more important, and that is we really, and again, not rocket science, but we really, really, really need to create a community of people who feel like they're doing something meaningful and part of something that matters. And that involves investing in that community, and then in investing, so us investing in that community as kind of BlockPower organizations in general, and then people investing themselves into that community. And that can only happen with time. We've been building and flying at the same time, basically since summer of last year, and we haven't had that type of time where we've had an organizer and kind of real kind of human connection that makes people feel like they're part of something special, and develop that connection over time, and then develop that sense of community over time. And that is a huge part of what we're trying to do right now, is with the health, wealth, and power modules, essentially try to keep people engaged over a longer period of time, where they can both kind of gain the expertise of other ambassadors, and then also potentially create their own modules that are, what wisdom that they have inside that they would like to share, and help them create a module so that they can share, hey, I might, be very passionate about the 4th Amendment. And we have one ambassador who is, and created a module that is focused on, the 3 things that one should know. And we really need to spread the word about, the 3 things about the 4th Amendment that really could help you if you are ever stopped by police. And there are so many kind of small concrete actions that people could take that would increase health, wealth, and power in their own lives and in their communities, like in the lives of their family and friends, that could kind of happen over time. And that's essentially now what we're building, is this network with organizations that are on the ground, like the New North Carolina Project and Alliance for a New Justice System in Texas, and then more over time, that is just focused on keeping people connected to something that they believe in, so that it's not hey, right before an election, come do this thing. Instead, this is part of a long-term relationship with other people that care about the same things that I do.
Yeah. And Karthik, I'm gonna punt a legal question over to you, since you dealt with a lot more of the pro bono group. But the question is from Jason. It says, has this model sparked any legal interest from either party thus far? And do you anticipate any? I'll come back to your legal slide.
Yeah, it's a great question. So can you go back to the Anthony slide?
Is that back?
Or yeah, back. Yeah, here we go.
Yep, this
one. Yes. So if you think about what kind of both partisan and nonpartisan organizations do, is they hire full-time field organizers to essentially recruit and train volunteers who go and talk to people that they either know or don't know, and get a walk packet or a phone call list, and try to encourage them to vote. So essentially what this is exactly the same thing, but at a much smaller scale. So we pay voting ambassadors exactly analogous to a field organizer. And those field organizers, or in our case, voting ambassadors, are recruiting people to become volunteers. And those volunteers commit to talking to 3 of their family members, friends, and neighbors. So it's really exactly analogous to what goes on already. However, we're able to do it at a much broader scale. And so instead of paying people, the equivalent of 60 grand a year, or $5 grand a month, instead pay people very small amount of money at a time in order for them to look through lists of voters.
And I will say the other part of that is we did, part of the reason why we didn't operate in all of the states that Karthik mentioned in the very beginning was because of some legal restrictions, not around necessarily this model, but around who can be hired as an ambassador. And is this person, are we able to pay this person under a contractor sort of model, which is what we do, or do we need to hire them on as an actual employee? And so we had legal teams in each that looked at each state's laws and sort of told us where we could work. So I think Pennsylvania we couldn't operate in for some of those reasons. And so that that's the other side of it. But that's sort of state by state tells us whether we can operate in those states just for that part of it.
And the key thing is that we're very clear to folks, hey, and in fact, there are other organizations that have kind of crossed the line into either paying people to vote, paying people to register other people to vote, or for turnout, so either kind of paying people based on whether someone else takes an action directly kind of related to registering to vote or vote. We do not do that. What we do is essentially exactly the same as a field organizer, or we pay field organizers. We help people find people that they know and recruit them as volunteers to talk to other people that they know. And that is not paying anyone to vote, not paying anyone based on whether someone else votes, is just focused on spreading kind of messages about voting and making plans to vote. The other kind of the piece that Chris touched on is that there are kind of sadly some places that make it really hard to pay people small amounts of money. So in Wisconsin, for example, you can't pay someone more, as a nonprofit, you can't pay someone more than $10 a week without them becoming an employee of yours. It just makes it really hard to process and get a lot of people up on the network. And so that's why we focus on kind of Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina.
So maybe you guys covered this when I missed it because I came in late, and sorry for that. But how did you populate the vote tripplers?
The vote tripplers are, so there's a couple of, so anyone that is actually not even just registered voter. Registered voters are all captured on a public voter file in all of our states. We use a company that aggregates all of that and adds some information that would let us not only get people who are registered to vote, but also people who might not be registered to vote. And it also adds some information so that we can provide better recommendations to people, meaning that when Karthik shows up, even though Vilma might be way across town, we know that Karthik and Vilma are similar in a lot of ways, and so maybe we populate Vilma up the list. And that's one of our technical challenges right now is how do you populate? How do you create a list of people who know each other without actually having any real information about the social graph? But anyway, the data set that we use is that. I mean, it's essentially a list of everyone in the state, and you can buy these data sets.
So I see that you allow Facebook logins, right?
I'm sorry?
You allow login with Facebook.
We do allow login with Facebook, but we do not pull any data from Facebook. So these are simply just login. At this point, we don't. It's actually very difficult because of Cambridge Analytica to go in and get people's friend list on Facebook. Google's a little bit easier to get people's contact information, but Facebook, it is basically not feasible without both people installing the app to know who that network is anymore. So that's not it. This network here comes from these like commercial voting or commercial resident lists. And yeah, this is just login information. We do have in the newer version ways that we're hoping to let people, say, yes, you can access my contacts on my phone or through my Gmail account, those types of things. And that would hopefully help us figure out who these people are. But it is still, we're digging into a little bit of the nitty gritty of what are the analytics problems we're facing here. I'm a little bit OCD in my Gmail contacts. That's where all my contacts live in Gmail and they get ported over to my iPhone. So I'm OCD and I like being able to like type into my Google Maps and say, I'm going to Karthik's address, and I just type in Karthik and it pulls up his address so I don't have to remember where he lives, right? I am a weird person in that regard. Most people will not even say Karthik Balasubramanian in their contact list. It'll just say Karthik or like Karthik B. How do I match Karthik B to this list, right? With no other information, So those are the types of problems we have. There's 10 different Karthik Bs in the data set. And then we're starting with a fuzzy match on those edges, right? We're starting to develop weights that say, Chris probably knows one of these 10 Karthik Bs, probably, but we're not sure. But those are some of the fun problems we have from a data side, which is how do we show people how do we show an ambassador triplers that they probably know without real data on who knows who right now?
So do you use any sort of like once people mark the people that they know, do you use that to train your?
That was the plan. I don't think we didn't really get big enough scale. So just to be concrete about what we did in the Georgia Senate runoff, we basically took these large data sets have information about all sorts of stuff. So it'll have estimates on your salary, it'll have estimates on your education. It'll talk about do you subscribe to Fox and Hound magazine or whatever, right? So it has a lot of information actually about the household or the individual. And so what we did is, think about having like, I guess it was a couple hundred columns of information for each person, right? And so what we did is we distilled that down using principal component analysis to 10 different dimensions that capture people. And then we defined a similarity metric based on those 10 dimensions. So we did a little bit of so PCA, after the PCA, we normalized, then we did a k-means clustering to identify clusters of people that might know each other. So we created these little clusters. And then we also have a distance metric, which here in the newer version of the app, people could say, like, weighted a little bit heavier towards people that are physically close to me, or weighted a little bit closer to your algorithm, which is trying to guess. So that's where we were at. And that was exactly the plan, is to build up enough data to learn. We just never really got enough scale to do it, to be perfectly honest.
It might be interesting to play around with the sorting and the filters if the objective changes in healthcare versus voting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't think about whether proximity or actually knowing. I don't know the best way to say that is better, and is that a function of healthcare versus health, wealth, or power? Right. So I hadn't thought about that.
Do we also think that race would matter?
Unclear. So in this, every single tripler in our data set is Black. So so that is one thing that we filtered out of our, like, we are focused on health, wealth, and power in the Black community. And so everyone on this list here is in some way modeled, because there's all these different models, but it, to the best of our ability, is Black. So I don't know if we expanded this beyond, if we added Caucasian, what that would do. I don't know, to be honest. Dry, you've had a little hand up there for a while.
Yeah, I do have a couple of clarification questions.
Yeah.
So because you were talking a lot about the ambassadors. So what I'm interested in knowing is what are the challenges that you have faced in recruiting ambassadors, if at all, and how do you motivate the ambassadors to, let's say, recruit, to encourage people to vote apart from the monetary compensation?
Yeah, this is a great question. So so we've had a lot of challenges. I mean, this has been kind of up and down for a long time, and we've kind of very luckily worked with some like phenomenal organizations that and phenomenal people along the way that that have kind of helped us get to where we are, and kind of we see this being kind of a very long-term effort where we continue to build on the platform as a kind of that's responsive to what people actually want and what people actually think will help their own communities. But specifically to this question of recruiting challenges, recruiting ambassadors, we did have quite a few ambassadors, even for kind of when we were in partnership with pretty kind of fairly recognized brands. I think this was a scam. So a lot of people basically just like, oh, this is a scam, this isn't real. And I think, we, for a long time, all through November, all through September, October, November, and then, for Georgia, the kind of months up to that, is that we were sprinting, and we weren't able to make the investments that I think we need to, that we're now kind of investing in now, is like actually community building. And community building kind of, creates, there are a lot of benefits that come from this. Like, one, people are more likely to refer their friends, family members and neighbors into something that kind of they already believe in. It's not just like, hey, like you can earn a little bit of money, but hey, I know you care about X, and this community is about amplifying your own power and voice. And then also it allows it is kind of more of it kind of sets up someone's ability to be more of a follow through, or to actually have more follow through on voting messages. So we can't pay people on outcomes, specifically for voting. We can't pay, it's illegal to pay someone based on whether someone else votes. So we just paid for kind of the initial work. But if you get the wrong type of person, someone who's just wants to do this and and do a bunch of checkboxes, you can get that. And we actually did get quite a bit of that. And kind of one reason for that is that kind of we were sprinting and we didn't have much time. We didn't screen as much as we could and should have. But now kind of with the, we went after Georgia, we took the totally opposite direction. Now that we do have both time and money, we actually are specifically focused on building a community around building health, wealth, and power. And basically the people who are joining the network as ambassadors are coming because they're activists, people who already believe in, they're very passionate about the Fourth Amendment, or they're very passionate about getting people insurance, or they're just like a bunch of different reasons that people latch on to kind of specific issues. We all do, and people want to share that passion with people, and we want to create a platform that allows them to share this passion over a long period of time. But this is kind of going directly to your question about what those challenges are, and how do you motivate people, and essentially, our bet right now is that if we create a platform that makes it easy for people to share their own passions and get continually recharged, that they'll stay engaged for a long period of time and ultimately follow through on a lot of voter turnout work.
That helps. Just a follow-up question on, have you explored the role of religious institutions like churches in helping to recruit, or turning these low propensity voters into high propensity ones?
Yeah. This is a great question. Black churches are huge and uber important. So the interesting piece of this is that Black parishioners are much more likely to be high propensity voters than low propensity voters. However, what we didn't have time to do was really engage through our partners with a lot of churches that were focused on recruiting their parishioners, not as targets, not as vote triplers, but instead voting ambassadors. And that's something that we hope to do in the future.
Okay. And just a last question on, see, I understand the wealth thing, I understand the power thing, but what I'm not able to connect with is the health part of it. If you could throw some more light on how are you helping to improve health in these communities, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. So basically kind of what, ultimately what is voting all about is basically like increasing quality of life, your own quality of life and quality of life of the people that you care about. And essentially kind of what we're, and all of this is kind of intertwined. If you're not healthy, then you're probably not wealthy, or if you lack power, then you might not have wealth, etc. And essentially it's just, these are things that people care about. And these are things that people are passionate about. And essentially kind of our goal with health, wealth, and power, obviously kind of most directly is to kind of have people be able to kind of absorb content that will ultimately increase kind of positive outcomes in their communities. But even, the kind of the underlying goal is to just keep people engaged in this type of work, kind of thinking about their community and thinking about how they can take small actions. So, there are people who really care a lot about kind of specific health outcomes. So, there are people who really care about, lead pipes, or people who really care about colon cancer screening, or people who really care about really anything. Every one of us has something that we really care about. And what this is about, what this kind of, we didn't really get to kind of what we're working on right now. Aside from, we showed you a lot about the voting piece, but this platform that we have right now that we just kind of started with the New North Carolina Project and Alliance for a New Justice System is focused on helping people create their own modules that they can share with the network of people, of other people who want to make their community better. So by increasing health, by increasing wealth, or by increasing power. It's kind of a roundabout answer, but essentially it's just an all-encompassing thing to increase quality of life in a community.
I just have a parting thought in terms of the health. Maybe you could look at helping these folks to enroll for health insurance, because many of these folks, they don't have, let's say they would qualify for Medicaid. I'm not making any judgment statement here, but there is a correlation between wealth and, people from particular communities.
Yeah, 100%.
So helping them to enroll for Medicaid insurance may be one way to achieve all the three things.
Absolutely. So there's one of our partners, so New North Carolina Project, Amy Steele is the executive director, is very, very focused on getting people enrolled into ACA. So kind of with the ACA, and North Carolina didn't expand Medicaid, and now, and there's kind of a way to really help ambassadors who care about, for example, getting people enrolled in health insurance, to kind of share their passion and get the word out to other ambassadors so that they can spread this knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was really informative. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for hosting.